Woman, an in-depth exploration of the world of women today with Sandra Elkin.
Good evening and welcome to Woman. My guest this evening is Karen DeCrow. We're going to be talking about some of the controversies within the women's movement and some of the challenges facing the feminists in this country. Karen is author of A Young Woman's Guide to Liberation and this book, Sexist Justice. She is an attorney from Syracuse, New York, and president of the National Organization for Women. Welcome once again.
Hi.
Karen, you've done a rather controversial thing, or at least some people see it as a controversial thing. You've changed the focus of NOW. You're going to take NOW in a new direction.
Well, it's not I, although I'd love to take credit for it. It's really the membership of NOW voted in a new set of officers who ran on a platform of modifying greatly the directions that NOW had been in. And I think it's really exciting. I think it's the most exciting thing that's happened in feminism, in about 8 years. Basically, I think there have been charges, and they're probably to some extent accurate, that the feminist movement was directing itself primarily to well-educated, wealthy, white, straight females. And this is, of course, a very important group, but it's really impossible to get at the problems of discrimination of this group without realizing how it ties in to the oppression of other groups. So what we hope to do is take a good look at the mainstream of American life, which cuts out so many people, and figure out why this is and how the economic system can be analyzed and how the political system can be changed to accommodate all the groups who are now just outside looking in.
I understand that the criticism took that form, that there weren't enough different kinds of women included in NOW. But some of the current criticism is coming from the very women that other people felt NOW was geared to, the so-called white, middle-class, straight women.
Well, I think...
what is their objection to what is happening?
It's always best if somebody's objecting to ask them, what's the problem?
Well, they're not here, though.
Well, probably they will be, but at another show. But it's not that there's going to be any less attention paid, say, to getting women college professors promoted. But obviously, if the focus of an organization which is hoping to upgrade the status of all women is attending only to a token number of women and being satisfied with, a few women getting very sexy, high-paying jobs, we aren't changing the life of the majority of women. I think there's evidence of this. The Equal Pay Act was passed in 1963, and yet today the wage gap between men and women is wider now than it was in 63. So something has to be changed about the focus of the feminist movement so that we can actually change the economic status of most women in this country. And that requires a look at the economic system from top to bottom. Another mistake we've made that really is more philosophy, I think, than economics. We bought the analysis that everything men do is better and everything women do is somehow inadequate. That only a housewife. Oh, you don't want your daughter to be a secretary, God forbid. She should be an executive. Why a nurse, when you can be a doctor? We systematically took all the occupations that women have traditionally worked in and assumed that they are in some way inferior to the occupations that men have worked in. Well, we bought the existing line, and it's an incorrect one. And there's nothing in the world wrong with being a housewife. That is a respectable occupation that, first of all, must be given economic security, which it now does not have, and must also be open to men. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being a nurse. There's now literature that, we embarrassedly throw away that said something like, don't settle for being just a nurse. You can all go to medical school. Of course they all can't all go to medical school,
Well, how did this change in attitude come about?
Well, many of us who've been in for years.
In NOW, you mean?
Right, in the movement, in NOW.
In jail.
Awful thing to say.
Sorry.
In jail, you have a lot of time to think. Did a lot of reading and a lot of talking and a lot of thinking and a lot of looking at the way women live in other times in history, the way women have lived, and looking at other cultures and looking at other countries. And it occurred to us that we were saying, in effect, what the great American dream for every American boy is, you know, to be a big success and work 20 hours a day and never have a moment's time to, you know, contemplate or play Monopoly with your kid. And that whole thing, that in a sense we were saying that's the ideal for women. Except it was even going to be worse, because not only did women have to live up to this ideal, they also, to this day, have the major responsibility for child raising, for housekeeping, so that we were, in effect, saddling, the ideal American woman was going to be saddled with 2 full-time jobs.
And do you think the women's movement was contributing to that?
Yes, I do. I think, at least in my early days in the movement, I assumed that being a housewife was a cop-out. I assumed that every nurse, certainly female nurse, should have been a doctor. I assumed that if we talked about university affirmative action, we were certainly talking about women full professors. We were not talking about the clerical help, you know, workers who were making practically no money. I mean, that was, I think that the movement started out with most of us having a rather elitist view of what revolutionizing society meant. Yes.
Okay, what is there specifically, action-wise, planned, that's in the NOW platform that would deal with it?
Well, we're setting up housewives now, office workers now, nurses now has already been established, to bring in groups of women who have previously felt, I guess, alienated because they felt that, you know, what was going on and now didn't have relevance to their lives. I think very healthy thing that's happening is a great burgeoning of chapters. So in a city, there are now, say, a lot of suburban chapters that would attract housewives. We're trying to set up inner city chapters in hopes of attracting people who live in the inner city.
So in other words, you're going to specialize in a way?
No, we're really broadening the focus and hoping to attract groups, including men.
Okay, what would, for instance, a NOW of secretaries?
Oh, it won't be a NOW of secretaries. It'll be a task force to work on the problems that women in that profession confront, the main one being inadequate pay and low status. And of course what should happen in offices is that the people who are responsible for the final work product don't have enormous differentials. It takes the form of sex discrimination. Yes, secretaries make $7,000 and executives make $50,000, and most executives are men and most secretaries are women. But that's also an unfair labor practice, you know, to have such a discrepancy in the office. One exciting thing that we did in NOW is we've just consolidated and reorganized our own offices into one National Action Center in Washington.
That was another thing that there's been a certain amount of criticism about.
Yeah, and there's been criticism on one aspect, for example, that we're paying everyone in the office the same thing. And someone said, oh, isn't that a terrible socialist plot? No, it's not. It's a very good way to be a model for the outside world. It's a, you know, striking, use one for secretaries. In other words, the clerical workers, to show, you know, how your consciousness gets raised. At one time in the NOW administration, we had someone making $19,000 and someone in the same office working with the same kind of papers and so on making $6,000, because we'd bought, you know, the kind of hierarchies that exist in an administrative office. I think the main point about the new trend that we want to go into is not, and I say, you know, I would love to take credit for it, but I mean, clearly it was a mandate from the membership who voted a certain kind of platform in people on a platform.
Yeah, I want to talk about that in a minute.
Into office, but I think what we want to do is not assume that what exists in the society is fine, and we simply want to get women in. You know, here's a corporation, should be half women. Here's the university, there has to be half women, up and down the line. I think that's kind of not a very analytic way of approaching the problem. And what we really must be doing is looking at the institutions themselves and seeing how they must be changed in order to give justice to people in the society, including, of course, women.
Let's talk about Philadelphia. There were some very interesting descriptions in the press, smoke-filled rooms, very
Gee,
sophisticated.
most of our members hit you in the face if you light a cigarette. Smoke-filled rooms, indeed.
And very sophisticated politics going on. It is true, isn't it, that the politics have become very sophisticated within the organization? I mean, it's a sign of growth, one would think, right?
Well, I still harbor this great fantasy, which I guess is never to be, that we would all be sisterly and everyone would clearly state the issues she's running on, and then the others would go into the voting booth and just vote. In other words, I am not enamored of American political smoke-filled rooms, and I'm not enamored of now smoke-filled rooms. So I guess I've read a lot of the press, and I think one of the things that sort of awed the press, although I'm hardly objective, is that there were so many people. It was the largest now conference in history. There were over 5,000 people there, some point. That's a lot of people. I was chairing the meeting. And, I looked out at this, I'm kind of nearsighted anyway, and, it was just an enormous group of people to be dealing with. It was, I guess, exciting in that way. We've come of age. I was at a NOW conference when there were, I think, 105, a national NOW conference in Washington, D.C. in '67, where there were, I think, 105 people registered.
And was anybody talking about infiltration then when there were 105 people? There is a certain amount of talk now by people who say they feel the women's movement has been infiltrated and now has been infiltrated.
Well, I've been accused of being a CIA agent. That's nonsense. I mean, as far as I can...
Is that a sign of the political sophistication, do you think? Is
No,
that or a symptom of it?
I feel if people are saying that the feminist movement has been infiltrated, I think they should show some evidence. I think what it is people open up the front page and they see, oh, the CIA's busy in Chile, they must be busy in the women's movement. I think it's...
Well, one of the things is the Rockefeller Commission report, which supposedly when talking about Operation Chaos mentioned the women's movement. That's one of the things that is
Yeah, but there was
often.
nothing very specific, and it's an area that I just can't get too excited about. Yes, there may be paid informers. People tease me all the time. They say, oh, your phone must be tapped. Oh, good God help, the poor people tapping it, I have to listen to hours of, conversation every day. That probably, put them into a big snooze. It's, I don't think that's much to worry about. In other words, we have a lot of things to worry about in the feminist movement. We have to worry about a corporate structure that makes a lot of profit because there is sex discrimination. If all the women in this country were to be paid equal pay for equal work, the money wouldn't be around to pay us. I mean, it would bankrupt all the companies. I mean, there are very real things to fear, and that, somebody in the chapter might be paid by the CIA just doesn't frighten me. I feel anybody has any evidence, let them come forward with it, and, it can then be refuted. I think one of the things is in the 50s, if you didn't like someone, you said, oh, they're communists, and then they had to go around defending themselves. Now, if you don't like someone or you want to make trouble for them, you say they're a CIA agent, and then they have to, or they're supposed to defend themselves. And my feeling, I guess, when someone says that to me is, oh, I should file an immediate libel suit, because it is, of course, a terrible thing to say, and it's groundless. It's just nonsense to talk about. There are so many, you don't have to look for specters. There are real problems facing the women of America. We're in a recession. Here we are trying to get into an economy as equals, into a shrinking economy. I mean, what could be a more frightening and, bottomless task to do that? We are trying to become politically active in a party system.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
That looks to me like, it's a male club. The McGovern reforms don't look like they're going to happen this year, and we're going to be we're going to have the same kind of problems getting feminists into office.
Now, now is going to change its position also as far as political candidates.
Now has begun endorsing candidates.
You think that's the hugest change that was made as a result of Philadelphia?
Well, that's probably the most controversial. Many people feel that being active politically is, well, I guess it's threatening. And I'll give you an example. If you are an organization with primarily a lobbying thrust, you go today to visit your state legislator and you beg him to vote for the Equal Rights Amendment. He says, no, that's too dangerous, bad thing. I won't vote for the Equal Rights Amendment. You smile sweetly and you go away, because tomorrow you're coming in to lobby on a credit bill and you want his vote. And you don't do anything to alienate him at all, because the next vote down the pike might be a vote that you could get from this person. Now that's a fine tactic. It ain't going to change very much. And my feeling, particularly about state legislators in unratified states who voted against the ERA, is they must be eliminated. We must change the personnel in the state legislatures in order to ratify the ERA. And going political is controversial because it's frightening, it is threatening. I'm in your office and I say, you voted against the Equal Rights Amendment last year, what are you planning to do next week? And you say, I don't believe in the Equal Rights Amendment. And I say, we are going out to find someone to beat you. You cannot turn your back on the women in your state and in the country, since we need the ratification. So I think this is a much more perhaps threatening to the establishment kind of step to take. And I have felt for years, I was at one time politics task force coordinator for Now, and I felt then, and I have felt strongly until we finally decided to do it.
Now, do you think that's going to work? That's going to be a more effective political tactic?
It is going to be an effective political tactic. I know from my mail, the candidates nationally and at the state level are courting Now. There is no question about it. They want our endorsement. And in addition to endorsing candidates, we are doing negative endorsements, which has worked. In other words,
explain negative endorsements.
Someone has voted poorly, and he's an incumbent, and you go out to defeat him, not because his opponent is that good, but to show that you have the clout to defeat someone. And you go around campaigning and you say, do you know that State Representative so-and-so voted against a woman's right to get an abortion unless she had her husband's permission? And people then, know what the record is.
Do you have in mind specific things that you hope to gain by those political tactics?
Well, what we need ultimately in the nation, if we're going to have justice for women and for men, is a Congress and state legislatures that are feminists, men and women feminists who do not believe in sex discrimination. And the only way to get good laws, in other words, is to have people with the proper heads making these laws. This is not just my conclusion. Recently, the federal government wrote a report on why Title VII has failed. And I find this fascinating because, if Now wrote a report on why Title VII isn't working, Title VII, as you know, is the employment section of the Civil Rights Act, you'd say, well, maybe it's biased. But I mean, they themselves analyzed the problem. And the problem is, of course, there's not enough money, blah, blah, blah. But one of the main things that they cite is the people administering the agencies to end sex discrimination are sexists. They don't have race consciousness. They don't believe that sex discrimination is a crime. And therefore, of course, they aren't doing a very good job of enforcing this law. Well, the same would hold true for judges. If you have a judge on the bench who doesn't believe that the Equal Rights Amendment is necessary, if you have a judge on the bench who thinks maybe the laws for women should be different than the laws for men, if you have a state legislator who believes that it isn't just a criminal thing to discriminate against women in the state, then you will, of course, get bad judicial decisions, you will get unfair laws. And at the enforcement level, such as with Title VII, you will get laws that are very good. Title VII isn't a good law, not being enforced because you do not have people with the proper consciousness making the decisions.
Are you going to concentrate on national offices, or are you going to try to organize at a local level also?
Oh, all, state, local, and federal. I think the major work is certainly going to be done by the chapters of now. There are over 800.
Are you going to have an office in Washington?
We're going to have one National Action Center in Washington, D.C., but the main purpose for our consolidating our offices and reducing the amount of central bureaucracy is we wanted to get the money back to the states and the chapters, so that the case has always been that the best actions of now have come from the local level and the state level. And what we want to do is use National now, use the board as a means of implementing policy of the organization and of coordinating actions, not dictating actions down. In other words, it should be from the grassroots up. The chapters should be telling the board what they want rather than the board should be telling the chapters what to do. And just back for a minute to this political thing, if my mail is any indication, now chapters all over the country are interviewing candidates, deciding who they're going to endorse, frightening the candidates, into asking, may I come before a now meeting?
So the opposition is not there anymore to this move by now, by the membership, it seems.
Oh, I assume that there are people in now, there are obviously now chapters that don't want to get involved in this, and they don't have to, of course. But it's an option open that I think is a very exciting one.
What does this mean for the National Women's Political Caucus, say?
Well, I met very recently with Audrey Collum, the head of the National Women's Political Caucus, and what it means is that in some instances we have double clout, and what it also means is that we're two different kinds of organizations. We're both feminist, but the National Women's Political Caucus has, I think, a narrower mandate. Now has a very broad mandate. We want to end sexism in America, and the political aspect of it is one aspect of it as opposed to the total program. The reason it's so important to have political clout is that is ultimately what frightens legislators, the fact that they may be removed, the fact that here is a group that wields power and clout and can defeat them or can help somebody get into office. I was on the phone for hours the other day, a big hassle in some state. They're deciding whether to endorse a person, as a matter of fact a woman, for the U.S. Senate, and her record is being closely scrutinized. She is now trying to defend certain kinds of votes that she made because she wants the now endorsement very much. She feels it's the now endorsement that could get her a victory.
I think it's going to be very interesting, to see what your new policies bring for all of us. Let's talk about the Equal Rights Amendment. What happened? There's some people who are calling it the biggest blow to the women's movement to date. There's some people who are saying it was not that important, that certainly it won't sink the movement, that the Equal Rights Amendment will pass ultimately anyway. What's your feeling?
Oh, I certainly couldn't go around thinking that the Equal Rights Amendment wasn't going to pass. What we are doing now is targeting the 6 states of the 18 which have not been ratified, which have the best chance of passing. And
what are those states?
They have not been chosen yet.
Oh, okay.
And we are having a giant strategy conference to target the states. People from all the unratified states are gathering together, plus political experts, plus public relations experts, plus lobbying experts, and so on. And when these 6 states are targeted, and we hope other groups will concur with our targeting, all the money is being put in there, and the human resources and the talent. Basically, each ERA fight in each state has to be handled by the people in that state. And so what NOW has done in the new reorganization is free up monies that can go directly to the states that are unratified. For the 6 that we've targeted particularly, to get that done. What may have to happen, if we cannot get it in 76, is in the elections of 76, the anti-vote ERA voters in the state legislatures must be voted out of office. In other words, each time we lose by 2 votes or 4 votes. And what we want to do is change the personnel so that we can get the federal ERA, if not by 76, certainly by 77.
Okay, there's another issue that came up out of Philadelphia, and I don't know whether you think it's important to bring up or not, and that is the lesbian issue.
Oh,
There's
it's
a
very
tremendous amount of criticism, especially on your stand on that issue.
Well, my stand on the issue is a stand that I will not, swerve from. I am convinced that discrimination against gay people is sexism, and anyone who does not recognize that seems to me either has great emotional hang-ups or else just a failure to analyze the, intellectual analysis of the problem. And gay people in this country have failed to play the sex roles that were laid out for them, and they have brought upon themselves, incredible kinds of discriminations. So now, of course, since 1971, has had a very good position in support of lesbians. It's a civil rights issue. Lesbians are women who are doubly oppressed.
Is this going to threaten what's considered the usual membership of now, the middle class?
I think
straight people?
People who feel that there's been a lot of press, we're frightening off the housewives. How ridiculous, how insulting to housewives, some of whom are gay, for heaven's sake, to say that if Now takes a stand on the gay rights issue, they will be frightened off. Of course they won't be frightened off, and if they are, we've got 2 very excellent new task force coordinators in our lesbian and sexuality task force who plan to travel around the country and diffuse this issue. This is not an issue to divide the movement. This is a genuine feminist issue. It is important, and the people who tried to use it as a divisive tool in the movement, it seems to me, must have some unfortunate agenda.
Karen, thank you. Thank you for watching, and good night.
Woman was produced by WNED-TV, which is solely responsible for its content, and was funded by public television stations, the Ford Foundation, and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.